It is now an honor for me to introduce Ms. Sandra Ligio Gonzalez, Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence for the Medical Technology Sector, who will facilitate the forum's first major discussion session, Integrity in Regulator-Industry Interactions, Learnings from the Pandemic. Sandra, over to you in Mexico City, and it's good to see you.
Muchas gracias, Andrew. Muy buen día. Inicio agradeciendo a la Coalición Interamericana para la Ética Empresarial por su amable invitación para moderar este panel. Es un honor presentar a Alex Machado.
Thank you so much for the invitation of moderating this panel. It's a pleasure to introduce our participants. We have in our panel Alex Campos, Lucia Rodriguez, Miriam Rosales, Lucia is from the Institution of Medical Devices in Lima, Colombia. Catherine Serrano, Regional Director for Latin America of the FDA. And Nancy Travis, Vice President of the Global Compliance and Governance of AdvaMed. They will share their perspectives and recommendations regarding the industry and regulators and the learnings generated from the pandemic. Never in the human history we have seen such a need on a global level so that every stakeholders would work in a coordinated way to provide urgent products to the patients, guaranteeing that all interactions are realized with integrity. It's important to highlight the debate that we have with representatives and with the sector of IVDs of the products of the region. We have been seeing this interaction between regulatory convergence and ethics. So in this way, we have seen this in different commercial treaties. Although obvious, it's important to highlight when we refer to the sector, we will mention all the relevant actors, including the IVD products, areas, pharmaceuticals, manufacturers, insurers, patient groups, among others. The WHO, in its publications about regulatory practices and reliance practices, emphasized the importance of regulation of the sector and regulatory relations among its participants, which base the regulatory decisions. In order to attain more efficiency of the resources, there is a need to build institutional memory that consider all the interactions and the development of indicators of evolution and interactions with the regulated sector. We have also talked about different actors, but it's important to reflect about the diversity of interactions that we refer to. When we think about exclusively the approval of products to be commercialized, the interaction among regulators and regulated offers different possibilities. So it's important to create new regulations through public consultations, but also technicians and regulators, the academia, industry, among others. Regarding products for trade, they are not important regarding specific information, but when we talk about significant innovations, to get to know the particularities regarding vigilance and post-commercialization that require quick solutions to avoid risk for the population, and to get to know the variables that were not foreseen, and all the actors can work on that to strengthen the safety and efficacy of products. The audits conducted on services and manufacturers is something that facilitates the approval of products.
Tampoco tienen precedentes y por ello requieren de igual manera del desarrollo de capacidades entre los reguladores. Los expertos en estas innovaciones normalmente se encuentran en los centros de investigación y desarrollo, ya sean públicos.
Usually are on investigation, and they are public or private, that can help regulators to develop these capabilities through constant interactions that will allow them to incorporate necessary elements to be able to have the corresponding evaluations. The development of technical capabilities as well as procedural are strengthened through interactions of regulators and the industry in international forums, because they will allow us to advance in convergency processes through exchanging information and knowledge and the experience and many actors on the implementation of good regulatory practices. For example, as we see, the interactions are many and very diverse. So it is fundamental to have structures and processes that will make sure we will have all of this going on in an ethical and transparent way. Now, I would like to first go over to Catherine Serrano so that she can share in general what is the perspective of the FDA of the United States, and then continue the dialogue that we're going to have with the questions that we have prepared for our panelists. Catherine, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And I guess thank you to all the participants in this conference today. I would say for FDA, obviously, the interaction between industry and the regulators is a very important part of the work that we do. And obviously, we have a lot of mechanisms in place to make sure that that relationship is as ethical and transparent as possible. And I think that from our perspective, those are sort of the guiding tenets of having this relationship function appropriately for and allows access to products, safe and effective products to our population. So number one, I think that there has to be ethical behavior, obviously, on both the part of the regulator as well as the regulated industry. There have to be defined mechanisms for interactions between the regulator and industry that have transparency to the public about those interactions. And I think when those basic tenets are met, there can be very rich conversations that happen between the regulator and the industry to make sure that the framework, the regulatory framework, works for the technology and for the realities that exist in the industry, and that also we can work together to find efficiencies in the way that products are developed, are manufactured, and ultimately are released to the public. And again, very, very thankful to be here today.
Muchas gracias, Catherine. Entonces, si me
Thank you so much, Catherine. So now, if you'll allow me, I'm going to start sharing my screen to share the questions that we are going to be talking about today in this session. Just a second, let me just put it in full screen mode. Can you please confirm if you can see my screen? Perfect, thank you so much. Okay, so now the first question, and I would like to go in order of participation, starting mainly with ANVISA, COFEPRIS, INVIMA, FDA, and finally AdvaMed, so that we can go through each of the questions. And the first one is, what are the best practices and protocols in your countries and agencies to be able to have effective communications that are necessary between the authorities and regulated sector at the same time as we maximize integrity and transparency? Alex, please. Initially, I would like to say thank you to the event organization, say thank you for the initiative and also say hello to everyone who's participating on the panel, colleagues from other regulatory agencies. It is a great and very important opportunity for us to be here in the context of the pandemic that has been going through all countries and that is putting the regulatory agencies in the central focus of great debates on world public health, especially about the vaccines and the medications as well that should help medical professionals all over the world to face the pandemic. Without question, the ethical dilemmas that we have, they are related to all activities of human life, without any question. And on the health, the public health plan is also an everyday dilemma. Every day we are facing decisions that put us on the ethical point of view in philosophical interactions, but as well as regulatory interactions, decisions that need in part to look at standards and health decisions as well that are going to interact with fundamental aspects of the citizen's life. And here we are talking about dilemmas such as fair price for medication and therapies. We are talking about innovation in health and products versus risks associated to health, dilemmas that are daily interactions and that the person who's registering these medications, evaluating them. And this question that is brought forth as the first question in this debate, what are the best practices and protocols of the agencies that can allow an environment that will maximize integrity and transparency? I would highlight 4 aspects. The first one, the example of the high guidance of the agency itself on the internal plan as well as public communication. The other part, a regulatory planning that is going to translate previsibility for the regulated sector. Another part, the participation about the regulated sector on structuring the standards that are going to be submitted. And for that, at least the Brazilian legislation recently has, patent instruments that are going to be used all over the world in terms of interactions such as public hearings, having an analysis for regulatory impact of that specific activity that is going to be regulated, and mechanisms of participation where the interaction between the regulated system is going to be translated into the standards that are being produced. So at first glance, I would translate this interaction that was already said here by our moderator as our FDA colleague. This interaction is very important. And during the pandemic, it was done very frequently. And maybe this is one of the legacies of this moment. These trust relationships were translated into ethical dilemmas that were solved in months of negotiation and considering the greater good, which is people's life and health. Thank you so much, Alex. Medium, please.
Hola, un gusto también estar aquí con todos.
Hi, I'm very happy to be here with all of you. And I'm here for COFEPRIS. And like you were saying, this time has been revolutionary for the pandemic. As we know very well, the pandemic has created a revolution. And the sanitary revolution wasn't, something that wasn't connected. So we want to improve and strengthen cooperation and communication with the regulated as well as the regulators. In this sense, the good practices for reliance, communication, and the good norms and regulatory convergency, these are some of the most critical factors to be able to improve access to health, not only in terms of commerce, but also in the sense that we have realized that there are a lot of populations in our territory that still don't have this access in an optimized way because there is no mature regulatory agency or they don't have enough health sectors that are going to channel these new technologies and medications to reach these regions. In this sense, COFEPRIS has created very direct communication with the industrial sector, the private sector. One of its techniques is to create a system called EduCapris. And on this system, what we are trying to do, and the main goal, is to give knowledge to all processes and regulatory improvements that are happening inside the institution, so that the regulated, the academy, and the population in general knows where we're going. Also, there is another platform called InnovaPris. InnovaPris is a forum and open dialogue between the industry, the academy, and the private sector, as well as the civil society, where we want to converge common topics. We have realized that the regulated as well as the regulators, many times we have the same problems. And one of them, for sure, one of the main challenges we've had in this pandemic was the regulatory simplification, converging on international standards, because this is key to improve access and having more optimal timeframes so that all of the goals are fulfilled, which is protecting the health of all the entire human population. Thank you. Thank you so much, Miriam. Lucia? Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sandra Ligia. Thank you, Dr. Campos. I want to thank you for the invitation. Thank you for inviting INVIMA in Colombia to this important conversation. And specifically to answer the best practices, I would like to add something to what my colleagues added, also because of medical devices. Because when the pandemic started, we really needed more medical devices, and we needed medical devices more than medication, because at the time we didn't have the vaccines. So first it was masks or shields, thermometers to measure temperature, the diagnosis materials to be able to diagnose coronavirus, because we didn't have those in our countries, and also the respirators, because we needed those for our patients. So always thinking of public health and what we would have for transparency. In Colombia, we have been having a legislation that allowed us to have, first, we would be able to simplify the requirements, which is making available several elements that were needed on the pandemic to be able to make the requirements more flexible. So usually with this legislation, which is already 15 or 16 years old at the moment, for medications and for medical devices, the manufacturer sites had to certify with the quality system, and also needed to have the authorization of the government, which is called sanitary registration. Internationally, it's called marketing authorization. When we said in hospitals we didn't have these products available, first it was the masks. So the pandemic just started, and what we had in terms of diagnosis, we were talking to our manufacturing sites to be able to have our quality checks and to get the sanitary registration. But to be able to send them in Colombia, we requested the certificate that it was sold in other countries. And in case of FDA, for example, we could have the emergency use authorization, because at this moment, Colombia didn't have any regulations to authorize emergency use. And then for hospitals, if they didn't have it available, we would be able to get urgent and prioritization of the processing of these products for coronavirus. And we can add the other products for medical devices as well, because I said the same for medication that was needed, anesthetics, whatever was needed, for medications. We were able to have these requirements more flexible, and the health ministry that usually has these standards, we started having more simple, simplification standards. And we continued using one of our mechanisms, which we did consider in our regulation, and was the thermos tables. On the industry with different associations, we've always have, technical tables. So we always have a specific topic that is being managed. And with the industry, at the very beginning of this entire process of coronavirus and the emergency, we had the technical meetings to be able to understand what was going on. And then we already had specific ones. So for the respirators in Colombia, we had a boom of all the respirators. And, you know, on the industry, we had a new actor which was the academy, the universities, because the industry wasn't inventing and making ventilators in Colombia, but we were doing it with support from industries and the academy. So it was a work of definitely having dialogue and technical meetings to try to understand what were the requirements to have a new ventilator, for example, and showing safety and efficiency. We also had simple technical meetings to guide people on how to use masks, and we don't need to have a technical research. So we had these panels and we were able to follow all these investigators and the people who, let's say, wanted to support this part and bring this type of product. And after that, we had all the decrees that would allow its prioritizations. We had the specific decree for medication and vaccines, which is emergency use, that was contemplating the beginning findings that is going to give us the technical information and requirements for the vaccine, and could be able to speed up the authorization of emergency use for these products. Perfect, Lucia, thank you. Thank you. Catherine.
Many thanks. So I'll build on what my colleagues from the other agencies have said. I think the FDA, one of the really important things that we had in place before the pandemic were very specific opportunities for engagement with the regulated sector, including industry, but also academia, as well as patients, to have different opportunities to weigh into the regulatory process at many different levels. So I think from the standard setting level, or if we're identifying what the standards would be for products and for performance of those products, there is a process by which we have we allow for input from a wide variety of stakeholders in those decisions. We also have the opportunity for pre-meetings with companies before they even maybe start their clinical trials, before they even submit an authorization package to the FDA, to ask us specific questions about their product before they get into the development stage. And these types of interactions, we expect as FDA to have industry come to us with very specific questions with a lot of information about their product. And that allows us to have really in-depth conversations and answer questions about the development of that product before they spend a lot of money and time going in a direction that may not end up being acceptable to the regulatory authority. And I think the other important tenet that I mentioned in the initial comments is that all of these interactions are transparent. There are documents that prescribe how these interactions will take place, what's expected in terms of meeting minutes and where those meeting minutes are stored, who attends those interactions, et cetera, to make sure that ethically there's no doubt that we're adhering to the highest standards as possible. And I think that in all of these interactions, it's really important that both the industry as well as the regulator come to those interactions prepared and ready to be as transparent and detailed as possible. In terms of the pandemic, obviously, I think these interactions were incredibly important in making sure that the products that were developed to respond to the pandemic could be done in such a timely and effective manner. And I think the engagements that we had certainly helped facilitate that. One of the things that was really important to FDA was making sure that we were transparent about what our expectations were in terms of product performance for authorized products initially at the beginning of the pandemic. And that was through publication of guidances on our website, and in which we allowed for comment from the regulated sector and from patients to be taken into consideration. But with those sort of targets in mind, industry was much more able to develop their product, to study their product, and put together an authorization package that had a better chance of being reviewed in a more efficacious manner. And then, of course, throughout the development process, we leveraged those individual product meetings with companies to better understand any specific issues that their product might have, and allow for companies to ask us questions about maybe different unique clinical designs that they were considering, what types of features maybe that a product that they had that they were thinking about designing, how that might play into how it should be evaluated clinically, so that we could provide our opinions before they went ahead and spent money on a clinical trial, et cetera, not knowing what the regulator, how the regulator might be thinking about that. And I think it helped both the regulator understand how industry was approaching the development and evaluation of these products. It helped us prepare for the actual applications that came in when they were ready. And it also helped make sure that we were all on the same page and we didn't lose time once those products were available. So I guess I'll stop there. But again, I think that just the tenets are having established mechanisms for interaction and being really clear upfront about what those are and how those interactions should go, and then making sure that those interactions are as transparent as possible. Thank you.
Catherine, muchas gracias. Nancy, la perspectiva de la industria, por favor.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you so much.
Now, Nancy, the perspective of the AdvaMed. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd first like to thank the event organizers for this opportunity to address this topic in this forum. It's a real honor to be here with you today. I'd like to extend my congratulations to our colleagues in Brazil on their advancing their consensus framework. It's truly exciting news. I'd also like to recognize the leadership of the regulatory authorities present on this panel. It's been great hearing about your experiences, and thank you for being so open to talk about this critical subject of integrity and regulator-industry interactions. Let me just take a minute to introduce myself and the organization that I represent. As Sandra noted, I'm the Vice President of Compliance and Governance at AdvaMed. AdvaMed is a U.S. industry association representing medical technology manufacturers. Our member companies make diagnostic equipment, therapeutic devices, also hospital beds, surgical tools, pretty much everything that you would want in terms of equipment in the healthcare space. We have a very robust compliance program at AdvaMed. One of the things that AdvaMed is known for is its code of ethics. One of the things we stand for is integrity in the healthcare sector. As noted earlier, there are two sides to ethical integrity, both the regulatory and government side and the industry side. Of course, there are other stakeholders as well. We all have a role to play. And AdvaMed is happy to have this opportunity to share a little bit about our perspectives on this role. So we've been working with our colleagues throughout the Americas and the Western Hemisphere to harmonize our codes of ethics and provide tools and resources to help improve codes of ethics. I should note that all of the countries in the Western Hemisphere have legal provisions that govern both the conduct of the private sector and the government authorities, and the conduct of the government regulatory agencies and staff with the regulated sector. So we have laws in place that we can look to in addition to these codes of ethics. We've heard some excellent best practices regarding these interactions so far. I would like to, most of my experience is with the US FDA. So thank you, Katie, for going through the process and the transparency. And one of the things I really appreciated about your remarks is the benefit that accrues to both sides from these interactions. I think we also heard a bit of that from Lucia. Some of the challenges in developing the ventilators on short notice were resolved through interactions between the regulator and inventors and producers. And that's really how we get the best outcomes. I think nobody's going to be surprised that industry is on the cutting edge of technology, and nobody's going to be surprised that the government is taking very careful steps to make sure that everything is safe. Not to say that each side can't be innovative or that each side doesn't care about safety. We obviously do. But by working together, we can bring our advantage in understanding the technology and match it up with all of the excellent research you've done on safety across the sector and ensure the best possible outcomes. So I would also say that the transparency that Katie emphasized is important. I think when you don't have conversations, or when those conversations are hidden or not described, that's when people get suspicious. And that's when you have problems with reputation in the sector. So that's a very important theme. So let me just talk a little bit about the United States. We've got two important legislative foundations, Anti-Kickback Statute, which prevents bribery of government officials, and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, the FCPA, which means that our companies pledge to uphold integrity throughout their interactions around the world. I know you all have your own legislative foundations, but I just wanted to mention ours. And I would say that even though we have a lot of commonalities between in the regulatory sphere and in the legal sphere, there are different approaches within each country. And that's why it's so important to have conversations like this. There's a whole regulatory convergence pathway of activity in the Americas Forum, which I applaud. It aligns with our ethics and integrity, harmonization and convergence pathways. And I think the important thing for us is to learn from one another, to learn how integrity will enhance our healthcare systems and make it stronger, and work together to make it a reality, while of course respecting the individual cultural differences and the needs of each country in the region. So thanks again for this opportunity to talk to you today. It is a real honor, as I said, and I look forward to the next question.
Nancy, muchas gracias. Muchas gracias a todos nuestros panelistas por compartirnos sus experiencias.
Thank you, Nancy, for sharing your experiences. It's evident the effort that all the agencies and sectors are promoting to advance in the recognition of the need of the interactions and the benefits they provide. How do we do that in a safe way as well? So thank you everyone for your comments. We can see that there are differences between the regulatory agencies. There is opportunity to advance in our conversations to guarantee these interactions in an integrated and ethical way. So right now, I would like to move on to the next question, which has already been approached in the first interventions, but we may be able to deepen it a little bit when we reflect about what we have already learned from the pandemic, and that can help us to strengthen the interactions between the regulator and industry. So did the pandemic bring to light new areas where interactions should be strengthened? So let's start with Alex Campos again. Thank you. Thank you. This is a very pressing theme. We all, regulators and public authorities, are learning to deal with emergencies, global emergencies. This has been a situation that posed the need to create new problem solutions. We used our ability of cooperation, and among regulators, that happened through regulatory convergence and harmonization, a solution that opened the path to deal with other unresolved issues. Just like was mentioned by Colombia. And this also provided a collective awareness about the need of regulatory agencies that needed to work on innovation, and the world started to observe academia, scientists, and researchers with the same way that we used to look at them. We base our decisions on evidence and technique, and we're able to see at this pressing moment an opportunity to make this awareness, which was already present in the regulatory sphere, to make this broaden and to bring visibility to the decisions of the agency, and not only visibility, but the need of a public communication that is fluid. The speed with which the Brazilian agency had to communicate with the population about the decisions, and the need to transform its decisions in explanations based on evidence, brought a huge responsibility to our decisions that had to be made due to the emergency. Throughout this process, we understood that we had to deepen our relations with the academia and scientific institutions, and also with the market. I remember situations in which the decision making was made with ethics, and we understood that import-export decisions might have an impact on the market, but the adherence to that import-export plan was in a situation of emergency. And then we developed different practices, submission of documents and previous meetings, requests for approval of medications, which speeded up the process and diminished the gaps between the interactions conducted for approval of medications. And maybe a legacy of this learning process are the terms of commitment that were adopted in a certain moment when we were analyzing vaccines and medications. In an ordinary situation, they might require the agency to postpone an authorization process, and due to the trust relationship built through transparency and public fluid communication, and the ability to deal with media and academia, so that those public commitments were able to be understood by the society. So this is a legacy. This is something that is here to stay. We adopt this commitments and understand that this required a new way of communication with the regulators to allow for public trust regarding the agency's decisions. Obviously, this whole process will bring up the need of strengthening the post-marketing surveillance, because these approvals were made under an emergency situation, and so they have to be monitored due to the need of something that is a premise of the regulatory agencies, which is the protection of health. So if I had to leave one take-home message from this learning process, I would say that the relationship with science and academia and the research institutions and the public awareness that our decisions were made based on this transparent relation. Thank you so much. Miriam, could you comment on that? Hello again. So the pandemic has revolutionized several aspects. One of the most pressing challenges that we faced was that we had to change the paradigm in how we work, interact with different sectors, just like Alex from ANVISA mentioned, there was a need to work not isolated like regulatory agencies, but the pandemic highlighted the need to articulate with different national and international bodies in order to be able to protect the health of citizens and reach and have the medications and vaccines reach the population in a timely manner. One of the most pressing challenges was the developing of vaccines and the authorization in a record time. The greatest communication with the public require more transparency in the process. So we need communication strategies to reach all the sectors involved in the process, both us regarding manufacturing, distribution, and also people who are consumers. In this process, we have to work with speed and together to have the access of medication, of safe and efficient medications. I think we broke one of the largest paradigms, which was to work in isolation. We thought that regulated sectors were in one place and regulators were in another place, but one regulatory agency cannot work without the regulated sector. If the goal of a country is to protect the health, we cannot work isolated. It's the same thing with academia, innovation, medication development. All the scientific challenges have to be channeled to the industrial and public sectors in order to improve the quality of life of all human beings. Here at COFEPRIS, we had a lot of challenges to find out how we would work with these issues. Before, we had a legislation according to which it took 180 days for an approval, and today we do it in 15, 20 days because the health of the patient cannot wait for the standard procedure. And that's why we created the authorization for emergency use and the communication with different regulatory agencies has to be stronger so that we have access to this medication in other regions. Another challenge was the digitalization. I know that a lot of agencies have that, and for us it was an ambition because the institution has been for a long time to do marketing approvals, and we have to try to be more efficient. And so this is a really big challenge for the institution, but we know that when we reach that result, it will be great, both for regulatory bodies, but also for us who facilitate the process, and most of all, so that the patients receive their inputs and the medication that they need. This is one of the primary goals, and that changed the way we observe and analyze a company. We have sanitary inspections that allow us to visit other manufacturers without having to leave the country. That was a big shift to adjust all the standards and adapt to the international standards. We had to get closer to other regulatory authorities. We have a lot of things to talk about because when we're aiming at regulatory convergence, we have to talk a lot about several aspects. Like for example, what is the norm in each country? What are the terms that we use? How can we adjust all these processes so that we can really apply reliance and reach a regulatory convergence, which is important for the authorization of sanitary records? This pandemic has really revolutionized all the aspects of our work. and of our interactions. Thank you so much.
Catherine, ¿nos compartes tu opinión, por favor?
Catherine, can you give us your opinion?
Sure, thank you so much. I would say I think FDA was really fortunate in the pandemic because we did have a lot of the processes and procedures in place to provide for the opportunity to interact with the regulated sector and the public. So I think that we already had those systems in place, and that allowed us to really just take advantage of them. But I really liked what Dr. Campos spoke of from ANVISA about how what I think the public viewed as a very accelerated process, I think was a welcome thing to see from a regulator in a crisis. Although I think it also created some nervousness about how we could possibly go that much faster in a time, during this crisis. And so I think having a lot of good communication about how these processes were already in place, how there were opportunities for transparency about in the interactions that we were having with industry, and then also allowing for the public to have the opportunity to weigh in on the decisions that were being made, either at the standards level or at the authorization level through transparent panel meetings when we were making big decisions about authorizations like on things like vaccines, having that opportunity for everyone to participate, to really make clear that there wasn't anything, there were not corners being cut, that this was really just an accelerated process that existed already in our system. So I think I really liked that point that Dr. Campos emphasized, and I think it was really important for the public to see that that these did already exist, so that they had confidence in the decisions that we were making. Thank you.
Catherine, muchas gracias. Lucia.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Lucia?
Me parece que tu micrófono está en...
Maybe your microphone is muted. If you can maybe open Dr. Ayala's microphone, please.
Listo.
Ready, okay. Thank you, Sandra Ligia. Well, in Colombia, as I mentioned previously, we had these scenarios of communication, direct communication. We've had that for years, and they are connected to the industry and big groups where all the time we are communicating what is happening in the pandemic. We were able to do that. And also the decisions that we were making, or the flexibilizations that we were implementing, or whatever we were speeding up, declarations and all that. Our webpage, as well as communication system, it is very important to us. And then we realized that not all sanitary authorities have information published in their web pages, and it's different, or it's actually difficult to obtain that information. So this was something that was a challenge and was a learning curve for us, because for us it was very important, the suggestion from the World Health Organization, trusting evaluation and decisions and the opinions of other sanitary authorities like the World Health Organization. And then specifically, we were able to find an area where the interactions could be strengthened. And this interaction between us and other sanitary authorities, to be able to share information and to be able to share learning processes. And to be able to have this regulatory simplification, Now, another important part that would also allow us to strengthen this process and would strengthen us as a sanitary authority is having adopted international standards. And these are able to make it easier to trust the information from other countries. So the quality system, for example, for manufacturer practices was the global standard, state of the art. For example, the option of the new ISO, and at the moment, we don't have good manufacturer practices talking about medical devices, for example. So for us, apparently that is a challenge as well. Although what I was saying is we have a standard, our legislation is a legislation where we actually translated documents from the FDA as well as global immunization. So we are kind of close to the world standards. So for medical devices.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Lucia. Thank you so much. Nancy.
Thank you. That was very, very informative. I would agree that the pandemic put huge challenges on both industry and the regulator. We were tested in real time in so many ways. And one of the things we've just heard quite a bit about was the demand to shift from day-to-day product approval protocols to emergency situation protocols. And from our experience, both in the United States and throughout the Americas, many of the medical device regulatory agencies did incredibly well. And the achievement that we just heard about shifting from a 180-day approval process to a 15 to 20-day approval process, it was really landmark and revolutionary. I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from this. I think some of the streamlining of the regulatory function perhaps can be brought into the day-to-day operations. But the points that Katie made and that our other colleagues made about public confidence are very important. The public is looking at these rapid product approvals and they're wondering how we did it so quickly. So I think the post-market surveillance is going to be vital, as Alex noted. I think I am confident that our products are going to stand up to the scrutiny that is going to come, and our approval processes are going to stand up to that scrutiny as well. And I do think, by and large, we've done an excellent job communicating with the public, and they are grateful for the efforts that we've all taken. I would say I do have one recommendation for all of us. We have done a great job regionally on regulatory convergence for those day-to-day approval processes. There are international standards that exist. AdvaMed has been working with the Global Medical Technical Alliance and the International Medical Device Regulators Forum to increase harmonization, convergence, and share best practices and tools. And we have a strong consensus that that's the right way to go. It helps you as regulators accept, if you wish, approvals from other countries. It helps the public have confidence in a standard set of procedures. And frankly, it's easier for industry to respond to one relatively consistent set of requirements across different countries. But what we saw during the pandemic is that the emergency protocols can be quite different from country to country. We have not spent any time, well, I don't know, I shouldn't say we have not spent any time. We have not spent a lot of time harmonizing emergency approval protocols, mainly because it wasn't necessary. Usually the public health emergency is limited to one country, but we've had a global pandemic. So when all of these new emergency approval protocols popped up, they were welcome, of course, because we were able to get products to market more quickly, but they were challenging because they were very different from country to country and region to region. So one of the things that I would recommend is perhaps in our regional harmonization initiatives and our global harmonization initiatives, we spend a little time on this, see if we can discern some best practices and have a recommended emergency protocol that we could share across countries, which would help us. Hopefully we won't have another global pandemic, but if we do, I think it would help us be even more efficient and even more streamlined. The other thing such an approach would avoid is confusion, both on the part of the regulatory authorities and on the part of industry. And one thing we have seen is we are worried about some opportunities for corruption and unethical conduct that have emerged because some of the short-term ad hoc and uncertain requirements that were levied. It's something we have been redoubling our efforts to identify and counsel our industry colleagues on, as well as our government partners. But that is one reason why I think it's very important to have sessions such as this so that we can communicate and continue to uphold a high standards of integrity and industry, because we work in all different countries. We'd be happy to join you as a partner in doing further work in this area. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Verdaderamente,
thank you so much. This conversation has been extraordinarily rich. I would like to have more time to continue talking to you about this, to continue going deeper into the opportunities that we have to move forward in these topics. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot more time. I would like to just close a little bit, other than thanking you for the participation, your openness, and for being here from all agencies. And I would like to mention a little bit that we all recognize the need of interactions for ethics, and of course they need to be transparent. And we do have this opportunity to move on and development of mechanisms to make these interactions easier. And it is very important, and we recognize all actors that are working on this consensus, and we can talk to the American leaders, for example, on the summit that we're going to have next year. The efforts to advance in the regulatory convergence may be potentialized from the consistent ethical and interactions. The use of international standards and references as basis for the development of regulations to advance in the process of reliance and recognition are also strengthened by the interactions with these characteristics. And finally, we have confirmed that ethical, transparent, and consistent interactions are a fundamental element for patients to have access to the products required to provide them with the health security to which we are all obliged. Thank you so much for your participation, and we hope that the rest of the event will continue to be a success. Have a nice day.
Gracias.
Thank you so much, Sandra and panelists, for really a tremendously insightful session on a fundamental topic, really, as the region looks to fostering integrity between regulators and the private sector.